welcome back to another episode of Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Wolfson. Today, I've got an awesome episode lined up for you guys. I'm actually speaking with two guests today. I'm speaking with Chris Temple and Zach Ingrasci. And Zach, apologies if I mispronounced your last name. Hope I got it right. But I'm speaking with both of them today, and they directed the film Vitalik and Ethereum Story. So they are both filmmakers. They directed this amazing documentary about Vitalik Buterin. He is a co-founder of Ethereum, and it's just such a great film. And in this interview, we talk all about the process of making that film, how crypto empowers filmmakers, how NFTs were used, and then we just also talk about Vitalik and the reasoning behind some of the scenes. So this is a great episode for those of you who are interested in Ethereum and the Ethereum community and Vitalik Buterin. Highly encourage you to stay tuned for the entire interview with both Chris and Zach because they've got a lot of interesting insights. Okay, before getting started with today's interview, I'd also like to take the time to thank the sponsors behind this episode. I'd like to give a shout out to Quai Network for letting me use this beautiful podcasting space here in Austin, Texas for this remote interview. Quai, you guys are awesome. They're a layer 1 blockchain and they're doing amazing things in the industry. So check out the show notes to learn more about Quai. And I'd also like to take the time to thank Kula DAO, the official sponsor behind Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. So let's take a few minutes to hear about Kula DAO and how they're innovating in the sector. Kula is a decentralized impact investment firm that transforms overlooked assets into shared prosperity and thriving communities by reshaping how value and opportunity are recognized worldwide. Okay, the moment you all have been waiting for, we're going to get started with the interview. But before we do that, I always want to remind you to like and subscribe, especially if you enjoy the content that you're seeing today. I've got a ton more coming and I want you guys to stay in touch. So be sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and yes, we are going to get started with today's interview. So let's get to it. Hey, Chris and Zach, how's it going?
Hi, it's really good. Thanks for having us on today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. I'm really excited to have you guys here and to talk all about what you're doing in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't be more excited. Our film is finally out in the world. You spend like 3 years making these things, so excited to just share it with people finally.
I know. We're going to talk all about it. And the name of the film is Vitalik and Ethereum Story, right? That's the documentary name?
Yep.
Cool. So before we get started with that, how about both of you tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves and what you do, and then we can go into some questions.
Yeah, so Chris and I have been making documentaries together for 15 years at this point. We've had films on Netflix, HBO, but they're all tend to be these character-driven human stories, and I think that's really the approach we took with this film. And it's a great way, obviously, to kind of make really complex issues and accessible to people, right? Because I think documentaries do a great job at bringing emotion and giving you this kind of look inside of somewhere you've never seen before, and less of a good job of like actually explaining what Ethereum is, for example. It's not like facts are harder to do in film, but I think we really hope this film brings a really human, unique side to this, to the broader kind of ecosystem of blockchain.
Yeah, podcasts are way better for getting into the technical elements of blockchain than a feature documentary, which is really just much more about the emotional story of it all.
Right. Yeah. And Chris, could you tell us a little bit about your background as well? I know Zach kind of introduced himself.
We co-founded a nonprofit called Optimist, and we hope the films that we make nurture optimism in the world. So I think we often think of ourselves as techno-optimists, of looking at how the future can be better and brighter, and taking the steps to get there. We actually were accidental filmmakers. We studied economics in college, and then sort of through learning on YouTube and just making films ourselves, we really fell into this love and passion for filmmaking and using it as a tool to share intellectually all the things that we're very interested in around the world.
Cool. That's great. So both of you, are you produced? Is that, or was it produced and directed, Vitalik and Ethereum Story?
Yeah, so we're both directors, and we had two amazing producers on the film, Carrie Weprin and Jenna Kelly. We've made multiple films with both of them, and Jenna works here at Optimist with us. We're a small team of 5 people, and so we're the directors. So the people, kind of coming up with like, what is the visual language, what is the kind of overall story arc, how do we, and then also the ones on the ground. I mean, with this film, filming with a billionaire digital nomad is a wild experience, right? Vitalik would call us up and be like, I'm going to Ukraine next week. Like, come with me. And you're like, okay, we're getting the crew together, fly to, Warsaw, get on a train with Vitalik and be in a bomb bunker. So, the film really takes you on this kind of 2 years of Vitalik's life, traveling the world, kind of seeing, on this roller coaster of 2021, 2022 to 2023, what it was like to be kind of this unofficial, leader in the blockchain, in the crypto space. And it was a turbulent time. So the film is entertaining in that way. You get to see firsthand what it's like to kind of be this reluctant leader. I think Vitalik very much is this, reluctant leader. It's not natural for him to be the spokesperson. And it was during this period, I think he really had to evolve and mature that kind of role he saw himself in, and kind of speak out for what he hoped the future of crypto would look like.
Mm-hmm. So is that why, the film was made? Why was the film made, I guess? What was the goal here?
Yeah, I mean, I think every good film begins with a lot of questions, right? And I think for us, a big driving one was, what are the roles of founders in shaping these new technologies that are coming up, and how can we learn from that? I think we met Vitalik when we were actually filming for another documentary, and he immediately just struck us as somebody who was worth spending time with. I think he portrayed a different side of the crypto community and culture than was being talked about at the time in 2021. He was very intellectual, very values driven, and it stood in stark contrast, I think, to a lot of what we'd become to expect in the mainstream coverage of the crypto world. And so we started getting to spend some time with Vitalik, and we quickly learned that he was worth a feature documentary in and of himself, that he became a vehicle through which we could get at the values, the technology, the questions that are driving so many people in the Ethereum community, and hopefully translate that for a mainstream audience. Because I think film can be a beautiful onboarding experience for someone, right? We did a theatrical release with the film, and so many people came up afterwards, after the watching it in person, and saying, this is a film I can finally send to my mom, and she can understand what I do for a living. Right. When I think sometimes sending a technical, white paper is a difficult way to get someone's parent to understand what blockchain's all about.
Right. Definitely. Let's back up a little bit. So were both of you a part of the Ethereum community before creating this film?
Not directly. I think if we back way up. So growing up, my dad was a private investigator, but on the side, he was obsessed with open source software. He was like, I grew up with Ubuntu as like my operating system, and I thought that was normal. And growing up, I just saw the values of open source, and always kind of was very intrigued in that space. And my dad kind of instilled that in me and my brother, I think, growing up. But we studied economics. We were both aware of Bitcoin, Ethereum. We had, in 2020, I think we had done a little, even invested in some meme coins, but very tangentially. And as we made a film, they kind of called This Is Not Financial Advice. It looked a little bit more on the psychology of money and psychology of investing. And so we were coming at it from that side. But as soon as we met Vitalik, just kind of realized there was much deeper values driving this, right? That there was a much bigger vision for the technology of how this could shape our society and economy. And that was just really intriguing. And actually at the beginning of the film, the mandate wasn't just to make a film about Vitalik. We were very lucky. We met Vitalik. We decided that we would jump into this kind of on a broader story of Ethereum, not knowing exactly where it was going to head, because that's the crazy thing about those documentaries. You don't know where it's going to end. And we did this fundraise. So for the film, the way we funded the film was by launching and did an NFT crowdfund. People Pleaser did the NFT, kind of like a sample cover of the film. And in 50 hours, we raised almost $2 million, which was mind blowing. For this is the largest documentary crowdfund in history. And what it allowed us to do was to explore a lot of different storylines. We were able to follow Vitalik. We were able to, look at Uniswap and a generative artist who was doing NFTs and kind of explore the different community. And after filming for 2 years with these different stories, we started doing a lot of testing with people who weren't in the space, and there's a lot of confusion. Like, people were very confused. Like, how do I understand any part of this? And it was really during the editing process that we narrowed it down on Vitalik's story, because like Chris said, he can be a vehicle that is accessible and interesting and, quirky and fun to watch, and gets you into kind of understanding the broader, kind of deeper values that drive this space. And we did make 5 other short films. If you go to ethereumfilm.xyz, you can watch some of those other films that were the other storylines that we were following that didn't ultimately make it into the feature documentary.
Yeah. Well, I watched the documentary and I found it to be very entertaining and just factual. I never knew a lot of the things. I mean, I've been in the industry since 2017, and it really shed a lot of light on Vitalik and his life for me. So I found it really, really interesting. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, what stood out to you? I'm so curious.
Yeah, I mean, just he's genius, right? And I mean, you kind of know that Vitalik is genius because he helped create Ethereum. But the way, his mannerisms, the way he acts, you can just tell that he's highly intelligent. And he's also very funny. I think he doesn't really mean to be funny, but he is. And he's just an interesting guy to watch. So I think that your film really brought that out.
Yeah, there's this amazing moment that I love where we spent a lot of time with Vitalik's dad. And Vitalik's dad told us this story about when Vitalik first came to Canada. He was 7 years old and his favorite toy was the computer. His favorite program on that was Excel. Obviously that alone was a bit atypical for a 7-year-old kid. I have 7-year-old nephews who are not playing on Excel. And his dad showed us this fictitious world that Vitalik had made at 7 years old. It was a 100-page manifesto PDF document about a fictitious world populated by bunnies. And in there, it had the bunnies' banking systems. It had their sources of energy. It had, how they structured their society. And you could see that already from that age, he was a world builder, right? At 7 years old, he was thinking about how to design these much bigger systems and new worlds of operating. And I think, to me, that moment, it really clicked of how and why he's approaching Ethereum in the way that he is he's thinking about rewriting systems and trying to push those boundaries as he has his whole life. And, I think at its core, we see Vitalik as a thinker and as a builder more than as a true tech leader or entrepreneur like the Elon Musks or the, Sam Bankman-Frieds or the people that you've gotten, I think a lot of people think about when they think of these typical tech leaders within within Silicon Valley.
Right. Well, another thing that stuck out to me in the film, and you kind of reminded me of that, is that Vitalik is very focused on the tech, right? He doesn't really care about the money aspect behind all of this. And so that was really interesting, just to have a crypto documentary focused fully on what the technology can do versus the price of Ethereum. And it kind of shows that Vitalik, at least the way I looked at it, was he didn't care as much about the price of ETH, right? But he cares about the technology and what it can do and how it can transform the traditional financial system. So that was really interesting about this, because we see so many crypto documentaries today focused on the price, right? Price of Bitcoin, price of ETH, or the collapse of FTX. But this was really unique in that aspect.
Yeah, I think Vitalik sees money as a tool to drive incentives, to create, something that, Yeah, he sees it as a tool, less of like something to collect. I know, Vitalik still gets like $5 haircuts. He truly lives out of a 40-liter backpack. He spends the majority of the time thinking about Ethereum, and then some time playing chess, and the other time like going on walks. Like that is what Vitalik does. And yeah, I was also surprised. I think that's where it broke some of those stereotypes that I was like, why are people in this space? And you think of it as a way to make money, but really it's like Chris said, a much bigger way of to reshape systems and try and push those boundaries. And obviously, as most of your listeners probably know, like, Vitalik has created this system that he so deeply believes in decentralization, and he doesn't control the space. It's a very unique place to be a leader. And he's developed it that way. And I think, like Chris, it was cool to go dive into his childhood, because it's obvious that a lot of his childhood has developed those values. Like, he grew up in Russia, and as Putin was coming to power, his parents saw this kind of looming authoritarian rise of a potential authoritarian figure, and they escaped that. And like, he really wants tools to avoid authoritarian rule. Like, I mean, that's partly why he's so excited about Ethereum. And you see in the film, I think the thing he's most proud about is how Ethereum and crypto in general supported Ukraine in resisting Russia. And being there in person with him, just seeing and him being constantly told by people in Ukraine that that this was really valuable, that this saved thousands of lives, because at the beginning of the war, the banking system was not functioning, and crypto allowed hundreds of millions of dollars to be, sent, right, allowed it to, provide nonprofit aid, to get weapons to the front lines. It really was critical in those first days of the war. And seeing Vitalik, finally see a real world use case that is world changing happen, I think was incredibly validating for him.
Definitely. And then when you met Vitalik initially, before you started this film, did you just kind of ask him, were you like, hey, you're a really interesting person, can we make this film about you? Is that kind of how you approached it?
I think we got really lucky. I mean, obviously Vitalik is a great subject of a documentary, because he's not looking for the spotlight, right? And a lot of times you just see him in podcasts. And I think we got lucky because it was at kind of the middle of the NFT boom, and it was a big stress on Ethereum, the amount of NFTs that were being minted, the kind of trading that was happening, and he started to begin thinking that he needed to speak up and use his kind of soft power more directly to kind of hopefully encourage people to develop other use cases on Ethereum. And I think we just got very lucky that timing happened when we first met him in San Francisco, and he was open to it. And we did kind of just, we got connected via a mutual friend, Morgan, who's awesome. And we just kind of sat down and filmed a little bit in the Redwood Forest with Vitalik. And, we had a great day of filming. And luckily, people around him had seen our previous films, our film Living on $1, and they really liked those. And so we kind of went from there and started filming together.
I think Vitalik probably underestimated the amount of time in filming that these films require. I mean, we shot hundreds of hours of footage for this feature film that, you guys are seeing 85 minutes of. And, that's often what it takes to create something that's truly special and great, is you have to, leave all these great moments on the cutting room floor, we call it. And that's why, as Zach said earlier, we released a lot of these short stories as Ethereum stories on our website, where you can learn more about Gitcoin, or you can get into these, about Uniswap, about these smaller, very important parts of the Ethereum ecosystem, but we couldn't find a way to work within that, 85-minute structure of a feature documentary. So we're very thankful to Vitalik for all of the patience and time that he spent with us, over the past couple of years, letting us sort of be a shadow following him around.
And it was cool to see his favorite moments after you watch the film are those moments where he's talking about tea or making eggs, like I think he wasn't expecting those moments to kind of like you show that side of him, and he was like, I have never seen myself portrayed this kind of way, and that was cool to see that those ultimately were his favorite parts of the film.
That's so cool. And I remember those moments. I remember when he was at that house with everybody. I forget where it was, somewhere in Europe, and was it in Europe? And they were making breakfast. It could have been in San Francisco.
They were talking about, the merge and
Yeah.
kind of preparing for the merge. I think it was in San Francisco.
It was, okay.
But
it was in Palo Alto, right? Like
yeah,
somewhere over
exactly.
there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But those, I mean, it's, for some reason, Vitalik can still be entertaining even when he's just making eggs.
I know that's amazing. I wish I could be entertaining while I'm making eggs, but I can't. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about how crypto elements are being used to kind of empower filmmakers, because both of you have made films not focused on crypto and not using any crypto elements. And now this is kind of a change. And I want to know how like NFTs were involved, how the fundraising was involved. I want to know all of that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just if people don't know, the documentary space and the movie space in general is pretty broken. It's very difficult to make independent films at this point that, aren't fully kind of controlled by the streamers or aren't in the very specific true crime, sports, or celebrity space. So if you're a documentary filmmaker trying to make an independent film that really says something new and takes a different angle, it's very, very difficult to get those films funded, and then even more difficult to get them distributed. Even out of Sundance this year, very few films sold. So we're working in a very tough space. And Chris and I have made 4 feature films, documentaries together. We've produced multiple others, and we've been in the major festivals and we've sold films, but it's getting increasingly more difficult to really get that out to the world and get people to see these. So crypto with this film has made a huge difference in multiple ways. I mean, first it was that NFT crowdfund that we did with People Pleaser, and we worked with Mirror.xyz, so we were actually able to like reward these people who were donating money to make this film through NFTs and bring them into a community on our Discord and kind of bring them along on this journey, get their feedback, get their support in making this film. And that was huge. It just gave us the independence to not make the film focused on scams and that you kind of, like you said, traditionally the price of crypto, and made us kind of allowed us to make something new that maybe a streamer normally wouldn't be interested in. But then even more so this summer, as we're finished, the film is finished, we needed money to, we knew we wanted to do this mainstream release on Apple and Prime, where it is currently, and eventually streaming. But as an independent filmmaker, you need a marketing budget for people to see it. And so we did kind of a decentralized early release. First with the trailer, we used Zora, and the trailer kind of went viral on using this kind of free mint model. And all of a sudden, we had funds we were able to start raising funds for this broader release. And so with that success, we decided to do 2 things. We did a decentralized world premiere in 30 cities in 24 countries in kind of the spirit of Ethereum. And you can only do that with this community. And so we literally one night only, we did it in all of these places at the same time. And just kind of, it was this moment of bringing the community together to watch this film. And that launched our on-chain kind of early preview window, a streaming window of the film. And it was really, you still have to know how to have a wallet. You still have to know how to buy an NFT ticket to watch the film. So it was kind of limited for the community, but that was also really successful. And again, kind of helped us build these resources that we are now pouring into the marketing of the feature film, the kind of mainstream release of the film. And so I think the tools are still early. It's not easy to use them if you didn't just make a film with Vitalik. But I think there's something really interesting there that's allowing content creators to use tools in kind of totally unique ways to bring independent productions out into the world.
Yeah, it's sort of like the case study of the frustration with gatekeepers that we talk about all the time within the community of, whether it's social media platforms owning their audience or, for us in the current documentary landscape, if you don't have a film that's on Netflix, Amazon, or Apple, it's very hard to find audience, right? They are the ones who decide what gets seen and what doesn't around the world. And we're funneling to fewer and fewer sources for that. And so I think, I think it's exciting to think about ways that, across really, funding, distribution, and community are like the three areas that I think crypto is asking good questions about for the documentary or independent filmmaking world. How do you be more creative in the funding models of how these get done? As Zach was talking about in the distribution, how do you cut out traditional distributors where when we released the film on chain, we were able to retain 100% of those proceeds. Whereas when it went on Apple, we only get 50% of that, and Apple takes 50%, right? Just immediately for the privilege of being on the platform of Apple TV. And then obviously in community, I think just being able to be, engage and build that audience directly on Discord and elsewhere, on X, on Farcaster. It's been really cool to kind of test some of these tools to, build up a small but powerful audience around this film where you don't have to reach everyone with every film. We always tell filmmakers, like, instead focus on who's your core audience, and 10,000 or 50,000 core audience members are even more powerful than a million people who don't really care.
Right. So with the NFT that you created for the film, basically, did it work like you were creating the film and you got the community together and you said, if you buy an NFT, you get early access to the film, you get behind the scenes footage? Was that how it worked?
Yeah, that, but also, Pleaser DAO, for example, was one of the major funders, and they became our co-executive producer on the film. We actually had an anonymous .eth who was the executive producer of the film. So they actually became part of the film team, kind of the higher givers. And like you said, we're able to kind of benefit from those behind the scenes. Like, we were constantly providing photos and kind of updates on the film. And then eventually, they got free tickets to what they got to stream the film first, or get tickets to the in-person screenings, kind of theatrical screenings of the film.
Are you able to tell me how much was raised through the NFTs?
Yeah, so through the NFTs, we raised almost $2 million at the time. So this
Wow.
was in July of 2021. So kind of the height of the NFT boom. So again, our timing was good. And People Pleaser is an incredible artist who was kind of at the forefront, and is still actually is at the forefront of art, the kind of the connection of art and crypto. I mean, right now she just came out with this incredible series that has multiple endings, and she's using crypto in kind of a very unique way of storytelling. And so it was so cool to collaborate with her on this kind of potential cover of the film that then included we were able to add the executive producers and co-executive producers that helped us raise the budget.
Got it. And then basically those people had access, like I said, behind the scenes. They could be a part of the film.
The token that they got by minting, by contributing at the time to Mirror.xyz was the platform. They got a token that didn't have any monetary value. It just gave access to the Discord. Mm-hmm. So they were part of that. And then
so part of the decisions along the way of, okay, where are we filming? What stories are we following? Okay, weigh in on these unique elements within the community that, maybe for us, we might not have known about in that moment, or we needed a certain connection. People could help connect the dots. Then we'd share photos from behind the scenes and little snippets along the way. And I think, I think it's, every Discord community, sometimes they can be hard to maintain constantly, especially where it takes years sometimes to make these documentaries. But I hope and think it was quite a beneficial experience for those who got to be a part of it.
Right. And so with traditional filmmaking, if there's not like an NFT element involved, I mean, that process is completely different, I'm assuming. I don't know.
Oh, totally. I mean, you can crowdfund on like Kickstarter for films, but it's difficult. It's just not inherent. Like with an NFT, at least you're immediately being rewarded with something that has both emotional and sentimental and financial value. So it just provides another layer of kind of buy-in and community building that I think just doesn't really exist with like a traditional Kickstarter crowdfund. Mm-hmm. So it just like adds kind of, it's just like Kickstarter plus, like it really for us supercharged the crowdfund.
But I think at its core, though, I think that same model of just building off of community is something that I think crypto has done really well in fostering and building community. So for anyone who's listening who might be approaching their own project that isn't in the crypto space, how do you find your core audience for your film, depending on what that topic is? And then, how can you empower them to support you especially at the early and beginning stages of a film where it's, you might have a really great idea, but it's hard to get that first bit of money or first bit of footage to start that idea and start moving it forward. And I think, crowdfunding and going to that core community is a great way of doing that for anybody who wants to create art.
Mm-hmm. Well, you guys definitely did it at a good time. I mean, Zach, as you mentioned, July 2021, right? And that's when the NFT boom was happening. Do you think if you were to do it now, it would be the same? I mean, are NFTs even still, in your opinion, like a thing anymore?
I don't think it would be the same. I think it would be much more focused on, I think Farcaster is honestly one of the more exciting tools in the space. And it's people are no longer kind of like going all in on like the Bored Apes of the world, or like it's much more about how do you get kind of mass audiences that are spending very small amounts of money. So our trailer release is kind of a great example on Zora. We were minting this trailer, and through the trailer release, we were able to raise also almost like $100,000 just from these like free mints, which for an individual, it wasn't like they're giving thousands of dollars. They're just minting it multiple times, and they're giving a few cents, but it's just how do you get volume? And so I think it would be very different now. I think Farcaster is like a really interesting community that's like really vibrant, and people are building kind of mini apps and kind of figuring out how crypto and social media work well together. But no, I don't. I think it would be much harder to do what we did nowadays, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it helps to have been the first, right? You're like, okay, hey, this is the first feature documentary you're going to be fundraised for in an NFT crowd drop. People were looking, I think, at the time for unique case studies to test and push those boundaries on.
And obviously Vitalik was involved. So it's like, not everyone is so passionate about the film you're making, but with Vitalik, it was helpful.
Definitely. And, just out of curiosity, was it challenging at all what was the most challenging aspect of filming Vitalik?
Okay, there was a number of challenges with this film. Yeah. Before we get to Vitalik, the first one was actually this crowdfund that we did. There's still, like, especially in 2021, we got all this money for this crowdfund. We bring it into our MetaMask wallet, and we literally thought it was gone. Like, it was a terrifying moment. And of course, it was just like, the token wasn't like discoverable, or we hadn't added the token. And so like the tools themselves were a learning curve for sure. And it still takes a bit of, really tinkering and figuring out with that. But then, yeah, I mean.
And then I think, filming with Vitalik himself, I mean, I think a big challenge just at its core is that Vitalik is very technical and incredibly smart, and he's most interested in the fringe, like the margins of where this technology is going and certain problems that he wants to solve, whether that's in layer 2 protocols or sharding or different elements of the technology that I think for a general mainstream audience sometimes are very, very difficult to understand. So I think it was part of what took so much time together was finding ways to break down the values and the questions of this community to something, very relatable and digestible for people who aren't already operating at the level that Vitalik is, right? And so that took a lot of time to get together and creating different situations, like just hanging out and cooking eggs instead of a formal interview, that made it much more interesting. Like, interviews aren't films. They can be great and you can learn a lot, but I think what makes this a beautiful film is that you get all the moments in between. You get to follow a real story. And I think, we've been so encouraged that people have just had a lot of fun watching it.
For sure. I had fun watching it. And it was very easy to understand as well. I mean, I've been in the industry for a while, but it's a film that my family could watch and they would find it fascinating. So you guys did a really good job of breaking down those technical concepts and just making it entertaining.
And I think a big part of that, maybe you would agree, is the animation. Like, it was a challenge to figure out how do you visualize a very abstract technology. And it was really cool. I mean, partly having all the budget of the film allowed us to work from the very beginning with really talented animators who helped build that Ethereum world. And how do you make it emotional and kind of, I think we were inspired by Vitalik's Encyclopedia of Bunnies. Like, how do you create this kind of realized potential world for Ethereum, especially as it kind of the rise of like rampant speculation and Bored Apes, yet there was kind of then being used in Ukraine and this kind of like constant interplay of how the technology is being used. And that took a lot of different iterations, a lot of different kind of experiments of, okay, how do we explain this very abstract concept in a very concrete, beautiful way.
Mm-hmm. One of the scenes that stood out to me was when you were in Ukraine and there was an event, a conference going on. What was it? ETHCC or it was something. A hackathon, exactly. A hackathon in Ukraine. You were in a bomb shelter because this is when the war just started. I mean, what were your thoughts there?
Oh man, I mean, this was wild. So, Vitalik initially, very like the first few days of the war breaking out, Vitalik was very vocal online, and he had this kind of really interesting quote where, Ethereum is neutral, but I am not. And that's kind of the first time that Vitalik has taken a semi-political stance, especially he still has family in Russia. There's a lot at stake for him to be so vocal. Very clearly, Vitalik is not safe to go back to Russia. And so it had consequences, this kind of vocal stance. He gave millions of dollars to the cause. He encouraged other people to immediately support. And then he had told us that he always wanted to actually go in person and support in any way that he could. And so a few months after the beginning of the war, we went together to Kiev and basically walked into this bomb shelter and supported this hackathon, both crypto, but also just technology more broadly, that was trying to support charity work and kind of frontlines work in Ukraine. And so then Vitalik spoke afterwards. He visited some kind of government officials and so there's kind of two moments really, and they're kind of jam-packed in the film. So, but the first was kind of immediately reaction to the war, and then the second was actually going to Kiev, still very much during the war. And Vitalik doesn't travel with security normally, and he's one of those people that just gets on a flight, and he's pretty distinct. So we were like, how do we make sure that we're all safe, him and the crew? And we were able to work with the Ukrainian government to provide that security. But there still is only one train that goes into Kiev from Warsaw. So it was a nerve-wracking shoot for sure.
Chris, do you have anything to add there?
Well, thankfully, I let Zach do that shoot, so I didn't have to go to Ukraine. And it's the benefit of dividing up responsibilities like that. I was like, oh shoot, I can't make it to Ukraine. What a shame.
I mean,
thank you, Zach. I owe a deep thanks to Zach for taking that one.
For sure. I mean, I watched that scene and I was like, whoa, this is like really intense. I can't believe like I spoke to Chris and Zach and, wrote this article for Crypto News about it, because as I was watching it, I was like, there are some really intense scenes in the film. And then there are also some really great scenes that are just kind of playful, like the eggs. But then another scene that stood out to me was there was a balloon. Were they in Germany? And there was a balloon. Was it a panda balloon?
Panda balloon right after the merge.
So Chris was shooting. We were again split up. I was shooting in Berlin, and Chris was filming in Denver, Boulder.
Yeah.
And so we were both simultaneously filming the merge. And Vitalik, just I think huge relief that it actually worked, and he just outside of this, holding this panda balloon, and which became kind of the meme of the merge at the time. Even Google, like if you Googled the merge, like the panda was there. And yeah, Vitalik he just expresses joy in a unique way, and that was a moment that I think he just felt really joyful that that I think that like 99% of the energy use was cut down. That this and even more broadly, this just vision that he and the community had for Ethereum actually finally happened after 10 years basically.
Yeah.
And I think to us, this was such a great example of, how Vitalik was in the community were putting their values into action, right? Where it's one thing to say, yeah, we should become more energy efficient, and another to find a way, even though it was really challenging and difficult and full of resistance, to actually convert Ethereum to the proof of stake model and to find a way to reduce energy consumption by 0.2%. Like, that happened overnight as a result of an incredible effort of so many people.
Reduce global energy consumption by 0.2%. Like, this is a pretty substantial thing that happened. And I know a lot of people in the space don't love to talk about the energy side of things, but like, it's real. Like this is like, Ethereum was using the same amount of energy as Argentina, and now it's not. Like, that's, in my opinion, very cool.
Yes, for sure. And that's captured on film, and I love that. So will there be a sequel? I mean, the Ethereum, there's always something going on in the Ethereum community, the Bitcoin community, the Stellar, all these different communities. So what's going to happen next? So.
Yeah, we welcome people to reach out to us with the, good stories or ideas that they have in the space. I mean, I think, again, we're always looking for, how do you create something that's timeless, right? Where I think it's very easy to chase stories in the crypto community. And I think what we're looking for, hey, what are the ones that can be, you could watch it 5 years from now and still learn and gain so much perspective and have those timeless stories. And often for us, those are around people. So especially if you find, these people who are pushing those boundaries or who are really interesting to follow within the ecosystem, shoot us a note. We'd love to hear about it. And, now obviously we created the feature film, This Is Not Financial Advice, which was more about the kind of speculative side of the psychology of investing, and now this one much more focused on blockchain and the technology there. We've carved out a bit of a niche of being able to explore these and speak the language of some of these tech stories. So we'll continue to explore it.
And I think we're so excited. There's other stories coming out, that are even talking about the technology, but also using it in release. Cold Wallet's a film. It's a narrative film that just came out that has used an on-chain release model as well, kind of a parallel to the mainstream release model. And I think there's so many stories here that it's like, we hope this is just one of the many stories of Ethereum or the broader kind of space in general.
Yeah. So just for our listeners to understand, I should have asked this probably in the beginning of the podcast. When you say released on chain, what does that mean? Because now the movie is on Amazon Prime, right?
Correct.
Or Amazon, yeah. So what does on chain mean?
We did we worked with bonfire.xyz, and they allowed us to create a token gated streaming release of the film. So basically the film was hosted on a server, but could only be accessed if you had an NFT token. And even though the film itself, the film itself isn't like being stored on chain, but it only can be accessed on chain. So that's kind of how it works. I think there's a lot of different ways of doing this, and we've started to see more people experiment with it. But we needed to be able to close that access because mainstream Apple and Prime, like, they have to have an exclusive window for the release through our distributor. So we're dealing with like constant like rights to the film, but the on-chain kind of gating allowed us to turn that on and off and allow at least a few months of people in the community to watch.
Yeah, it felt right to release it first directly to the crypto community that had helped us shape this film.
That makes sense for sure. And I love that. I mean, that's just another way crypto is empowering filmmakers. I mean, you get the opportunity to release that to the community that you think is going to have the most impact and enjoy watching it the most. Although I will say, I'm sure the mainstream is going to love this as well. And it makes the crypto space look good. It's such a win for us.
Good. I'm glad. I mean, I think like if you talk to someone who doesn't really know much about crypto, they're going to point to the Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world. They're going to point towards, the scams of the space, and that's just not the entire story. And hopefully, people can have someone they're able to talk about now that really is worth being inspired by. And I think that's Vitalik.
Definitely. Wonderful. Well, I know we're running low on time. So any final thoughts from you guys that you want our listeners to know about? Any upcoming projects, anything like that?
What do you think, Chris? I mean, I think we're just so excited that the film is finally out there. I hope they go to, Amazon Prime or Vimeo. If they go to ethereumfilm.xyz, you can find all the links. The film is released on different platforms in different countries. And so just go to ethereumfilm.xyz, check it out, send us an email if you have any questions, or if you're making a project yourself and want to navigate this crazy space of both filmmaking and then crypto as well. So, thanks for having us on. This has been great.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Chris, any final thoughts that you want to add for our listeners?
No, I mean, I think as we come into any of these new technologies in the future, like AI or, new elements within crypto, I think a great way to understand the ecosystem and make sense of technologies that are very confusing are to look at the values, the blind spots, the incentives of the founders. And I think they can be beautiful ways for us to make sense of technologies in the future, because we are coding our values into new technologies like AI and crypto, and those decisions matter. Is decentralization important or not? And are we going to stand by that? Is being environmentally friendly important or not? And I think at the end of the day, sometimes the harder decision or the easy decision isn't always necessarily the right one. And I think sometimes it can be difficult to make these calls and judgments to make something that is lasting and different. But I think Vitalik has been pushing the forefront of that.
He's definitely a legend. I'm so glad you guys did this. I've met Vitalik a few times, and it was an awkward interaction. And just like now, I get it. I'm like, I'm not offended, because as you watch the film, you realize like his personality. But he really is. He's a legend. I'm so glad you guys did this, and I hope all of the listeners watch the film. Zach and Chris, are you guys on X or anything where social media if our listeners want to follow you or get in touch?
Yes, please follow us. Our main account is at Ethereum Film on X, and actually across all socials, TikTok, Instagram, and then our personal handles are at Zach Ingrasci and at Chris Temple. So check us out.
Great. Well, thank you guys, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch and watching more films from you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye. Special thanks to 4Labs Digital for producing Web3 Deep Dive podcast. I'd also like to thank the sponsors behind Web3 Deep Dive. You can click the links in the show notes to learn more about each of the Web3 initiatives from these sponsors. Finally, thanks to the listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and share.